Master Reddit. Subscribe for more videos.
Serious, what's the creepiest/scariest thing that you've seen but no one believes you? I don't know what it was because I don't remember it, because I was a baby/toddler, but my mom certainly does and mentions it occasionally. I was her first kid, and when I was born my parents lived in a little old house in Scotland. Mum says that really quite often, both I and the dog would stop whatever we were doing at the same time and both look towards the stairs as if we were watching something either descend or ascend them. This is corroborated by my dad and a few of their friends who saw it happening. It's basically their friend group's weird inexplicable story. I just happen to be an unwitting part of it. Unfortunately I have no memory of this at all and the dog in question died 30 years ago, so they'll never get their answer. Yeah, if the dog was still alive someone could have asked him what was going on. I was about 4 years old, visiting my great-grandmother in NJ. She made a bed for me that sleep on in the living room. I fell asleep easily, but at some point I woke up and saw my great-grandfather. He sat on the edge of my bed, smiled, patted my leg and got up. He put his jacket on and walked out the front door. He had been dead for longer than I had been alive and I had never met him. Adults the next morning all laughed at the silly kid with a big imagination. At Grandma's request I described exactly what he was wearing: flannel shirt, suspenders, khaki pants. Generic description of any grandpa for the last 100 years. Everyone was still giggling at my cute story. But when I got up to show her how he snatched his jacket from the hook by the door and slung it on in one motion, I turned around smiling only to see her completely pale-faced with tears running down her cheeks. Everyone got really quiet, and we never talked about it again. She knew I had seen him. No one else's opinion matters. Edit, quite quiet indeed. That's both heartwarming and deeply saddening at the same time. Was out hiking to go stargazing, saw a deer wandering across the trail. But there was something wrong with the deer. Not like it was hurt or anything, but the longer I watched it the more uneasy I felt. It was like I was looking at something dreadful but my brain was substituting deer because it just couldn't deal. The stickmen, my tribe calls them. I saw one, exactly as you describe, outside of Carson City in Nevada. A couple other people have mentioned them here. Or it could have been a sick animal. When I was little, between 6 and 11, I'd experience what I later found out to be Alice in Wonderland syndrome. My blanket would feel like it was 6 inches thick, my room would grow longer as I looked down across my bed, my stuffed animal would get smaller, I could hear echoes of pretty much any little sound, and sometimes I felt like I was shrinking. I'm not sure why it stopped, but I'm definitely happy it did. I remember something exactly like this when I was younger. Ears started ringing, the room seemed to expand and lengthen by triple its size, but if I focused I could see the textures on the wall like I was 6 inches from it, lasted a few minutes and really creeped me out. I was too young and scared to explain it to an adult. I have never talked about it or heard of it since. After 30 years I now have a frame of reference. Thank you Reddit. One time our family dog ran away. He was super shy and scared very easily. We got him from an animal testing lab. So we gathered all friends and family which we could get our hands on, and shortly after he bailed there were numerous search parties, altogether about 24 people, looking for him. After a whole day of searching without any sign of the dog, the sun was setting slowly, I was standing on the edge of the forest, where I searched and called for the whole day, and suddenly saw a deer just 15 meters from me staring directly in my eyes. We stared at each other for at least a minute, no move and no sound, then I asked with a smoothing voice, "Did you happen to come across a lost beagle?" I swear to God, till this day, the deer nodded and looked down on the ground where it was standing. Then it jumped away into the woods. I was thinking to myself that I just imagined that Nod and the dog could not sit next to the deer without making any noise. But I could not check, and yes, there he was sitting in the exact spot, scared to death and shaking of fear. I gasped and cuddled the dog, took him on my arm and looked into the woods where the deer disappeared. There it was again, staring at me, directly in the eyes. I had tears of joy and was so unbelievable grateful while at the same time confused as fuck. Since that day I never ate deer again. I was once waiting for the metro in Shanghai and saw a woman in tears frantically run past. She stopped dead in her tracks and seemed to be searching for a train on either platform, but there was none coming. She was yelling something, but I didn't speak the language, so I don't know what. She then ran into the nearby bathroom. About 30 seconds later 2 men in ordinary clothes came barreling down the escalator. They were shouting, but again, I don't know what. They began walking up and down the track yelling, and then went into the bathroom the woman was seemingly hiding in. A few seconds later they emerged, dragging the woman away. She was screaming, crying and fighting like hell to get away from them. The men just kept screaming back at her, shaking her violently and striking the back of her head while they forcibly carried her up the stairs. Everyone on the platform just gawked, mouths agape, but no one did a thing. And then, mere seconds later, the entire scene was over and people were back to staring at their phones as if whatever the hell that was didn't just happen. I worked at a small gas station in my small town when I was in my late teens. I was stocking sodas around back in the storage room. A man startled me then apologized. He asked me for directions to Washington, D.C. I gave him the best directions I could. I sent him toward Philadelphia. He thanked me and went to his car. There was a kid about my age sitting in the passenger seat. He gave me the most evil stare I've ever seen. They pulled off and I forgot about it and got back to work. I remember watching the news sometime later when they arrested the DC snipers. It was them for sure. Sent chills through my spine. I'm glad they spared me. I've only told a few people because I'm afraid people won't believe me. It still makes me feel a bit uncomfortable when I think about it. Being friendly and helpful probably helped you. I thought about that. My dad always taught me to greet everyone with a smile and a handshake, and that is what I did. They shot a pregnant woman though, so I don't think they had a conscience. I think it may have been because of the security cameras my boss had up. My wife and I were driving up through northern Arizona on Highway 89 between Flagstaff and Page. It was about 1 a.m., as we were on third shift at the time and often drove at night to avoid traffic. I saw a few sets of eyes glowing in my headlights a little ways up the road, so I let off the gas, slowing down to avoid hitting an animal in the road. When we drove by we saw several dogs, coyotes, on the side of the road and I hit the gas and drove by. After we passed, my wife said one of them was running next to the car and I looked over and saw it as well, probably 20 feet off the shoulder of the road. I floored it and looked over and it stood up on its hind legs, that's the only way I can describe it, and kept pace with us for a couple seconds before turning away from the road and disappearing. This whole event probably lasted no more than 10 seconds, but it was seriously the most terrifying 10 seconds of my life. This was probably 20 years ago, and we still rarely talk about it. I had a similar experience when I was 13 to 14 years old in Arizona. We were heading down to Flagstaff to visit family, and as we drove at night I swore I saw some sort of dog running beside the vehicle. I didn't really pay attention to it at first, but then I looked at my dad and saw the speedometer reading 85. I looked back out and the figure broke off from the vehicle and headed out into the desert. I told my parents about it and they said that's impossible and that I was just having a bad dream. I was dozing on the couch at my parents' place last year. Not comfortably because I was cold. Then I felt a wave of heat pass over me, which was pleasant enough until I felt these firm, pointed fingertips on my head, like something was standing behind me with its hands on my scalp. I was frightened but then grabbed them and threw them off me. A few minutes later my mom came in and said she heard a door open and had got the feeling she should check on me. Probably a dream, but it was super creepy. When I was about 12 or 13 I woke up in the middle of the night and smelled my father's cologne. Thought it was a little odd since he lived about an hour away but was too tired to care. Went back to sleep, woke up the next morning and for some reason my mother didn't wake me up for school. My father had passed away the night before. Never told anyone for years about that night, but around the age of 23 I told my mom. She was glad to know that she wasn't crazy. That same night she got startled awake, and the dog was staring at the door wagging his tail. Almost like he was saying goodbye before fully leaving. When I was 9 my father passed away and said goodbye to me in his own manner as well. Woke up randomly in the middle of the night to see him sitting at the end of my bed. He had died just 4 days prior. He didn't say a thing, just reached out and put his hand on my leg in a comforting manner. I screamed and left the room crying because it scared me quite badly, but I remember it as clear as if it had happened yesterday. Over the years I've come to terms with the fact that he was saying goodbye and feel much more at peace with his sudden death. I was out with my friends and came home pretty late. I didn't want my parents asking questions, so I snuck in through the garage. The door was locked but I had a key. I turned the key to unlock it, but then I heard an abrupt snap and the door locked again. I repeated this 3 times. Each time I unlocked the door relocked. Exasperated, I cried out, "Mom, it's me." Then I heard the door unlock. I opened the door and no one was there. The silver Tic Tac. The thing the FA-18 Super Hornet recorded in 2004 that you can now see on YouTube. It was in 2010 over Olympia, or at least from my vantage point, that's what it looked like. I was in a boat on Henderson Bay with my parents, so there are 2 people who believe me. We saw this silvery ovalish thing flying about at incredible speeds. 1 second, it'd be over the city, the next, It'd be by the Olympics. It did this, dancing back and forward, juking and jigging, and then finally just pausing on a dime over the city. It went vertical and just vanished. The thing that unnerved my dad was the fact that it was silent. He's a retired engineer and said that we should be hearing sonic booms at the speeds the thing was moving at. The way it flashed between the city and the Olympics was unreal. It was broad daylight, no clouds. Then, 8 years later, I see what looks like the same thing from that Hornet footage. I don't know what we saw, but it broke the laws of physics as I understand them. 3:30 a.m. My buddy and I spent the night repoing cars. We pull up to the light in Manchester, New Jersey of 527 and 70. Going straight. In the left turn lane, getting onto 70 East, a blue, 97 to 98 Honda CR-V. The person driving had no face. Just blank. Like the green man from Always Sunny or No Face from Dick Tracy. My buddy and I both saw it. Nobody believed it. About 7 or 8 years ago I visited a friend a few cities over. They live in a fairly rural area, with some forested area behind their house. It was house, then 30 feet to a fence, then maybe 200-ish feet beyond the fence is this forested area. My friend and his family claimed spooky shit happened in this forested area, but I didn't believe it. Nevertheless, this kind of thing really fascinates me, so while I don't believe in paranormal or the supernatural, it's still interesting to humor the thought. I brought a hat with me when I stayed with them. It was a black hat with Jimi Hendrix's signature embroidered on it, my favorite hat at the time. I was told by my friend if I tossed the hat beyond the fence, not necessarily into the forested area, it'd appear in or close to their house. So I did. Tossed it over the fence one night, and lo and behold, in the morning it was on their front porch. Whatever, anyone could have done that. Nothing spooky about that. I tried it again a couple of times with the same end result, on their porch or by my belongings indoors each time. And each time monitoring my friend in the process to make sure he doesn't grab it and move it. Whatever, his brother or sister might be in on it. I took one of my friend's items unbeknownst to him, a belt buckle, and threw it over the fence, noting where I tossed it so I can grab it later. I didn't have to, because it suffered the same fate, on the front porch a couple hours later. This one confused me, but I was still skeptical so chalked it up to one of their family members seeing me and doing it. This all culminated when my friend and I went into the forested area one night. We brought flashlights and I wore my hat. After a few minutes in, the flashlights went out at the same time. He stopped and told me to run back. I didn't question him, there might be a wild animal or something and I don't care to get bit or harmed, so I bolted. To notice that he sprinted a few seconds before so he had a measurable head start. In the process, I dropped my hat. I didn't care, I ran. When we got back inside the house, my hat was waiting for me in my suitcase. No one was with us, especially no one who could have grabbed my hat and went the long way back to his house faster than us. My friend didn't grab it either, since he was already gone when I dropped it. To compound this, we were the only ones at the house that night, and it was locked. I still don't understand to this day, but I did leave my hat with him, half wishing it would appear at home several hundred kilometers away, but no dice. Some other weird stuff happened, but this was the biggest example of weirdness. About a year ago I was up watching movies late at night when I got hungry and went downstairs for a snack. My room is across from my daughter's room and her door was open. As I was coming back upstairs I start turning left towards my room when I hear, clear as ever, "Daddy, can you close the door?" I turn around, don't say much and just close it. Once I'm back in my room, I lie down to watch TV when it hits me, my daughter isn't there. She's spending the night at my parents'. I get up and go to her room and sure enough, it's empty. I woke up my wife and she thinks I'm crazy. Says I was probably tired and maybe it was the TV. I remember the voice so clear and coming in the direction of her room. It's very possible that it was just my head playing games, but it definitely made me question a few things. My wife and I are almost always together. It's rare that we spend more than a few hours apart. One time though she went on a trip with her mother so I had the house to myself for a week. On the second night, as I was dead asleep, I heard her voice ask, "Are you sleeping?" I jolted awake, groggily said yes, and fell back asleep. It wasn't till morning that I realized she wasn't there. I told her about it, and we both agreed that it was probably just the fact that I am so accustomed to her presence that when she was gone my brain just decided to edit her into my perception. Probably what happened with you, or ghosts. I lived in an old house in a small town growing up and there were quite a few strange things that happened while my family was there. The first thing I remember being creepy about that place is waking up in the middle of the night when I was 6 years old having to pee really bad. I climbed down from the top of the bunk bed and turned to see an old man in a rocking chair sitting by the door. I tried to wake my sister up in the bottom bunk but she wouldn't wake up and I remember her being almost like dead weight. I gathered up the courage to run by the man and out the door and fell asleep in the bathroom with the light on and got in trouble with my mom in the morning. My dad also told us that he thought there was something wrong with the place because he kept hearing kids playing and laughing when he would get ready for work in the morning. He woke up around 4 a.m. for work and would leave at 5:30. He told my mom that he heard laughing around the corner of the kitchen in the hallway one morning and went to see if it was one of us kids. Once he turned to the hall he saw a glimpse of someone running around the far corner to the living room. He followed this kid running until he was back to the kitchen. When he checked our rooms we were all sound asleep. My mom also said that she would sometimes see someone staring at her out of the corner of her eye if she was alone. Knowing all of this, when we were older we would try to scare our friends that came over. One day my friend brought her Furby, this was the late 90s, and we were playing with it in the bedroom. It started acting weird, sounding fucked up like the batteries were draining. It shut off with its eyes closed and wouldn't respond anymore. I said to my friend that we had batteries downstairs we could get. As we were leaving the room with the Furby in hand it suddenly popped its eyes open and said, "Hee I tricked you," and we just screamed and dropped it lol. Edit. That wasn't the only weird thing with a toy that happened. My mom always told people a story about a toy I had as a baby as well. It was one of those toys that talked when you pressed its hand and said things like "I love you" and "let's be friends." One night I was sleeping and the toy kept going off and repeating "I love you, I love you." My mom thought it was glitching and went to remove the batteries, but when she opened the back there was nothing inside. She ended up throwing that toy in the garbage. There were a few other weird things that happened there and I will always believe that house was incredibly haunted. Was stargazing with my family and noticed a satellite moving slowly across the sky. Looks like this for those who don't know. My uncle says, "Oh, there's another," and points at another light moving slowly across the sky. Then my aunt goes, "Wow, look how many," and points to a cluster of about 15 to 20 white dots. Looked like a bunch of satellites, slowly moving in a cluster together across the sky. "Wow, that's weird," we all collectively agreed as we watched this cluster of unknown lights move across the sky. Then they came to a dead stop instantly. The lights then began to slowly move around each other until they eventually were in a single line across the sky and they slowly faded away into the darkness. We all still have no idea what the hell they were, and the only thing that makes me know I wasn't just seeing things is that all 6 of us all saw this happening. Edit. This was the summer of 2015 in Sun River, Oregon. Edit 2. Apparently a lot of people have similar experiences. Mostly people also from the same area or neighboring states. With a few exceptions in Germany, Australia, the UK, British Columbia, and Spain. Edit 3. Alright, I guess this is a worldwide thing people have seen. Edit 4. Time period for people's sighting range from the early 90s to this year. Last edit for tonight. Night all. I was 6 and remember playing in my room and my grandpa walks in and talks to me for a few minutes. After a bit he gets up and tells me to be a good girl for mom, kisses me on the forehead, and walks out. Mom comes in about 5 minutes later hysterical and told me my grandpa had died overnight and we had to leave to go be with the family 2 states over where he lived. I saw something crouched in the road driving around one night. Its eyes glowed when my headlights hit it, so I assumed an animal of some sort, but when I got within about 15 feet of it, it stood up and looked like a girl standing there. I slammed on my brakes immediately, but suddenly the road was just empty. My friend in the car hadn't seen anything, but asked me a few minutes later if it looked like a girl. He'd apparently seen something similar with his sister a few weeks before in the exact same spot. So I travel a lot to remote locations for work, oil and gas in Texas, and the roads to our work sites are often long, unlit dirt roads. When working near the Mexican/Texas border we are told to never stop if there are peoples blocking these roads. If anything we should speed up and do our best to avoid contact, but if unable to do so we are supposed to whatever it takes to keep moving. I work on wind farms. Those remote areas are pretty freaky at night, you never know what's going to be out there. Pro tip, it's always mountain lions. One time I saw this gray thing run across the road in my headlights. It had long spindly legs and a fat gray body, and it didn't move right. It sort of loped along with the body going up and down like a seesaw. Freaked me right the hell out. I didn't want to get out of my truck that night. On the flip side, the sky at night out there. Could it have been a predator carrying another dead animal? That might give the illusion of the seesaw a bounce. Or it was the Lugaroo. My one weird thing was this: some friends and I were hanging out one summer's eve, We were around 15. It was night, clear, and we were all lying on my friend's trampoline in the backyard. We were just all chatting and looking at the stars. Suddenly, we're all like, "What the fuck? Did you just see that?" We all swore we saw a formation of stars trade places with each other. They sort of left a tail, like a shooting star, before resettling in their new positions. They all moved at the exact same time. It was strange, 3 of us seemed to see the same thing. Well, crap. Yeah, I've seen this same thing once before. In the early 90s. Maybe late 80s. I was around 13 or so. It was the night before my stepmom died, lost her battle to cancer. I was 22, was spending the night in bed with my 9-year-old half-brother, cuddling him and telling him his mom was gonna be okay, it wasn't gonna hurt anymore. It's about 3 a.m. at the time, and after a while he immediately sits upright in bed, smiles, says, "I promise to be a good boy, mommy. I love you." Now my stepmom has been bedridden for the last month, so she's not moving anywhere. But I swear on my life, and my little brother agrees with me, for a split second I saw her standing in the doorway wearing her big giant fur coat, just smiling at us and just looking relieved. Brother went to sleep about 2 minutes later. I left to go into my dad and stepmom's room to check on her to see my dad awake and telling me she died about half an hour ago. I genuinely believe she stopped by on her way to the other side to check in on her 2 kids and make sure we'd be okay without her before she left. When I was 16 I skipped school to stay home and play video games. I set up my PlayStation and made some Hot Pockets, and right when I get good and comfortable I hear footsteps walking to my room. I glance outside and see my parents aren't home yet, but was still afraid I was going to get caught. Seeing no place to hide I froze. Suddenly the door was flung open and I heard a blood-curdling scream echo through the house. I must have sat there petrified in that room for half an hour before going outside and waiting for my parents to come home. I tried to explain to my friends later what happened, but they thought I was just pulling some bullshit from the internet. Was walking through the Rockies and managed to tear the muscle on the side of my foot, so was hobbling back. I was on my own like a moron. In the space of hobbling back to Jasper I saw a white bear, think they are called spirit bears? Just sitting watching me. Literally thought, fuck's sake, I'm gonna die here mauled by a bear and no one knows where I am. But it just sat there and pawed the dirt in the direction of the town. I limped on, keeping an eye on it, and it just watched me. Then I swear to God no more than 5 minutes later a fucking wolf appears limping exactly on the same foot I'm limping on, eyes me up and continues on its journey. I think I was even too pathetic to bother with, is the moral of that story. I was petrified though either way. I was maybe 4 or 5. We lived in a somewhat questionable neighborhood at the time. And looking out the window one night I swear I saw a neighbor from an app nearby with her son. He was on one of those plastic trikes. I believe she ran inside to grab a jacket. In the 3 minutes she was gone, a vehicle pulled up and snatched the kid and took off. His mom came back and was looking for him. I tried to tell the adults in my app, but no one believed me or the other kids with us. Still the scariest thing that haunts me to this day. This is honestly the most nauseating reply in this whole thread. Goddamn. It was over 10 years ago now when a friend and I visited Japan. It was our first time there, so we went with a tour company. However, after the tour ended we stayed an extra night in a hotel in East Ikebukuro. During the tour leader tell us stories of haunted hotels and other urban myths, as you do over beers or when you're enjoying a late night onsen. One of the things he'd tell us was to be wary if you find a room where the head of the bed was positioned next to the window, so if you look up while lying in bed you look out the window. He'd try to scare us by saying in those rooms ghosts would come through the window at night and drag you out to your death. Back to the East Ikebukuro hotel. We check in the early evening and the first thing we notice is how small the room was. The second thing was they gave us a double bed instead of twin singles. The third, the bed head was right next to the window. We rationalized that the room was too small really to align the bed any other way, and the tour leader was full of shit. To be honest, we were more annoyed that we had to share a double bed, no homo. We decided to just let it go since it was just for one night. So we went out for dinner before turning in for the night. That night I get woken up by a door slamming shut and I jolt up. There, sitting at the foot of the bed, is a woman in a blue kimono. She had long hair and from what could make out, her kimono had butterflies on it. I freak out, dive and bury my head under my pillow. Looking back, that was a useless move if anything bad were to happen. I remember thinking, is this real? How can I check without looking? In my genius I decided to shuffle my foot down the bed thinking if I don't touch anything it's just my imagination. I didn't think about what I'd do if I did touch something. Little by little my foot moves down the bed when I notice that there is definitely a depression at the foot of the bed. Someone thing? Was there? I retreat my foot, start to sweat, and at this point just start repeatedly saying the Lord's Prayer till I must have fainted or fallen back asleep. I remember waking up at 6 the next morning and my friend was already dressed and packed. I asked him if he saw or heard anything last night and all he says is, "I don't want to talk about it, let's check out." It's not that people don't believe me, it's more that I hardly believe it myself. It was late, probably between 1 and 3 a.m., and I was sitting at an intersection waiting for the light to go green. Across from me was a dark road with trees on either side and thick woods off to the left and houses off to the right. So I'm sitting there listening to music when I see something move at the edge of the woods to the left. Now this is rural New Jersey, so things moving in the woods are either bears or deer, which aren't scary, but deer will fuck your car up if run out in front of you. I turned my high beams on to see what it was, but they didn't reach the woods. Then I saw more movement before the light turned green. I made my left turn and drove off, but I couldn't see what it was. The next day I drive the same route on my way to work, and when I get to that intersection there's cops and ambulance over at the edge of the woods where I saw the movement the night before. I asked a co-worker what happened and he said they had found dismembered body parts there early that morning. TL, doctor, I either saw a murderer, a bear, or the Jersey Devil kill and dismember someone. Was out camping near Crater Lake or alone. Trekked in about 10 miles from the trail with very light gear and made camp on a ridge overlooking this valley. Wake up in the middle of the night to shouting in the distance. Look down in the valley and see 2 flashlights moving in one direction. I figure it's some campers night hiking or playing a game. So I just observe. It becomes apparent they are looking for someone. I can barely hear them, but once in a while they shout out something like "We will find you" or "Come out." I can't remember exactly, but it was like they were toying with someone. Hide and go seek? That's what I'm thinking. Weird, but whatever. Eventually I see both lights turn suddenly and bolt in one direction. From what I can make out, they found who they were looking for. Again, I can't see much except for the flashlight's beams. The 2 flashlight people are laughing maniacally now, and it's creepy. Then I hear a loud woman scream and the movement of the lights stops in one spot and she continues to scream. It then sounds like she's being beaten and raped. I have no clue what to do. I'm unarmed and quite far from them. So I pack up camp and decide to head to the ranger's station. No cell service. It's rough terrain at night and I'm off trail with no GPS, and while I have great sense of direction normally, at night I can't see my landmarks. So to be safe I stop and decide to wait for sun up. Hardly sleep, and as the sun comes up I figure out where I am and continue back to my car in the ranger's station. I finally arrive exhausted, but the station is closed. I find the number to the Park Service and make a report. They thank me and said they would send out search and rescue. I follow the news the next couple days but don't hear anything, and I'm extremely curious. So I call back the Park Service and ask to speak to the same guy I filed the report with. Apparently they found the people almost immediately, all camped out together. After some questioning it comes out that they, 2 men and 1 woman, were playing a sex game rape fantasy in the woods. It was a relief to learn that no one was harmed, but holy fuck, it freaked me out. Myself, wife and kids were driving near some cliffs near where we live. We stopped to take in the view and some photos. I lined the kids up with a cliff drop and ocean behind them and took some pics. As they took a step back for me to get a better picture, they fell off the edge of the cliff. I woke up sweating and petrified. The nightmare felt so real, one of those that really stick with you. I went for a pee and checked in on all the kids, all fast asleep in bed, apart from my youngest 5-year-old daughter. She was on the floor. She had fallen out of bed but somehow was still sleeping. Next to her on the floor, knocked over, I assume when she fell, was a bedside lamp. The bulb from the lamp had burned, was singeing into the carpet, I think ready to burst into flames. When I was like 10 I talked to someone all the time through the like 6-inch tall slit window to our basement. He would always tell me not to go in the basement when I'd ask to see him cause he wouldn't be there anyway. Talked to him for a year and a half. Told me not to tell my mom cause he didn't want to scare her. A few years later I was telling my mom about the guy in the basement. I quit talking to him by then, and she told me she could believe me because when I was a baby she would always see my door to my room open like someone was peeking in to see if I was alright and then shutting it quietly. Told me that she figured it was the guy who owned the house before us because that used to be his grandkids' room. It was one of those small towns where our grandparents knew each other. Man op is leaving us hanging without telling us what they would talk about. Really want to know the details to this story. It was just casual talk. I thought he was just a guy hanging out in the basement all the time, never thought it was a ghost or anything. I remember he never told me his name, and that I asked him all the time why he won't come out of the basement. He would always just say, "I can't right now. I can't right now because I'm a fucking ghost who haunts this place." My sister saw something on several occasions throughout our lives. I never actually saw anything, only heard something extremely vividly. Basically, one night everything was happening like usual. My mom was out with her friends watching some game, and my dad was watching a movie with my sister and I. It was a comedy, so we all went to bed laughing about it. I was lying in bed about half an hour after we were tucked in, reading a book. I heard somebody stomping down the hallway downstairs, and then full-on sprinting up the stairs. I figured it was just my sister coming back from getting a drink or something, but I would have seen her leave her room because our doors are right beside each other, and the staircase is just around the corner. So then I figured it was just my mom coming back home and for some reason being extremely loud. The way my door is angled lets me see anybody who comes up the stairs, so I was watching and waiting as they seemed to be in quite a hurry. The footsteps were getting higher and higher up the stairs, but as soon as they got to the top, they completely stopped. There was nothing. My eyes were still totally fixed on the hallway as I got up to check who it was. I turned the corner and there was nobody. I immediately got covered head to toe with goosebumps, and tried to piece together what could have happened. Not even 2 seconds later I hear my sister screaming and she comes bolting out of her room with complete terror on her face. Without hesitating we run into our dad's room, where he is already standing up and asking what's wrong. My sister points back to her room crying, and says there's a man. My dad rushes into the hall, turns the light on, and then turns the light on in her room. He checks the closet and behind everything but doesn't find anything. Then he walks into my room and does the same, but still finds nothing. We spent the next 15 or so minutes holding his hand as he searched the rest of the house, flicking every single light on. He calls my mom to see if she had been home, but she says she's still with her friends. I could even hear the loud bar atmosphere through the phone speaker. We all slept in my dad's room that night. Over the course of the next 7 or so years, my sister had run out of her room crying about the same man in her room. She says he just stands there in the corner and watches her. She described him as a very tall man in a top hat and a trench coat, like a detective, she said. Everything completely black. It was a couple years after that I stumbled upon what's known as the Top Hat Demon, or the Phantom Hat Man. It turns out it's an actual phenomenon. Every description and drawing is exactly what she described that day. My son has seen him several times. I didn't know it was a phenomenon until recently. He would wake up at night and see the man standing in a corner in his room, on top of his toy box, staring at him, wearing a dark cloak and a top hat. Sometimes the clock was covering his head. I know a friend who called this man in corner because he would always stand in the corner. She had a fucked home life, so she would sit and stare at him instead of getting her parents involved. Every goddamn time I'm having a hard time and cry, my father knows. Even though we live in different cities. He'll call me and tell me he knew I was crying. That he could hear me. He never takes a wrong guess. When I move in another apartment, he can describe to me how my new place looks like before he sees it. Before I even talk about it. Kind of a scene, kind of an experience. When I was about 15 years old, school night, I woke up in the middle of the night. I remember looking at the clock, it was about 1:30 a.m. I went to the kitchen to make some hot tea to take back to bed with me. Now, our kitchen was attached to the dining room, which was a step down from the kitchen. The kitchen and the dining room both had large sliding glass doors and big windows facing the backyard, all on the same wall. The cabinets and counter where we kept the tea was opposite the wall of windows, and it made a little corner. I remember walking into the kitchen with the lights off, going to the tea corner of the kitchen, and then standing in the corner looking at the windows and sliding glass doors. I felt like someone was watching me through them. I got that gut feeling, you know the one. I stood there for about a minute. Very still, like maybe they wouldn't see me if I didn't move. Then I went back to my room, without making the tea. When I got back to my room, the clock read 5 a.m. I had been standing in the kitchen for 3.5 hours. And I had no idea how that was possible, because it only felt like maybe a minute. To this day, it is still the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me. My mom never believed me when I told her because she never felt anything bad in our house. I never did either, but that night I absolutely did. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button and comment below letting me know. It helps the channel and lets me create more content just like this. If you do like this type of content, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss an upload.